you may also like. A show about the things you may also like. Things like...
David, what has 30 years in voiceover, and it may be more, it may be less, but what has 30 years in voiceover taught you about communication?
Well, actually, Matt, it's been 40 years.
I was trying to be kind.
I did my first voiceover gig when I was 19 years old back in 1984. What has voiceover taught me about communication? There's more to communicating than just words. That's the simplest way to say it. There's more to communicating than just the sharing of words. In fact, the way that I paused probably says more than the words that I've actually said.
So what does a pause mean? Because it's powerful, and some of the best comedy comes from pausing. And we pause for effect. And so often we want to rush and keep talking, and then what happens is there's a lot of ums and ahs. So what does a pause represent?
Well, do you have a musical background? I can't remember.
Yeah,
the music, playing.
Music director. I did play saxophone and clarinet for a little bit, so I'll give myself a little credit.
Okay, so I've been playing music since I was 8 years old. My first instrument was trumpet. I can read and write music, and I forget who it was that said it. They said that music happens between the notes. It's kind of similar what I just said a minute ago about the words. Communication is not about the words. Like music is not about the notes. Music actually happens between the notes, between the pauses. A friend of ours, Nick Michaels, who was a Montrealer, he passed away. He was living in Florida for, I don't know, about 30 years. But he always talked about, voiceover in terms of commercials or things where you're selling. If you don't leave a pause, your audience becomes a victim of the message. But when you leave a pause, you invite the listener to participate in the message. And by participating in the message, it becomes more ingrained. You're communicating better. So it's those short pauses. I found this interesting anecdote. Larry King, we all know Larry King. And Larry King once said that the best interview he ever did was with Marlon Brando, where Brando barely spoke. He just let the silence hang, and Brando filled it with gold. Of course, that's Marlon Brando. The thing is that most of us can't handle silence, but if you embrace the silence, you're going to be amazed at what people reveal, and you do that very well, Matt. I've been listening to your interviews.
I've actually listened to a few other interviews just going back, and I thought, oh, maybe I should just insert some silence just for a little more effect. But it really does make me think about how uncomfortable we can be with silence. 4 people in a car together, nobody's saying anything, and everybody's sort of left wondering, what does this silence really represent?
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me why this is so important and why you need to communicate with people about its importance. How to communicate properly and, with hand gestures and intonation. And it's more than just the words.
Why? You're asking me why is that important to me?
Yeah. Why do we need to learn this?
To me personally, I believe that I don't mean to get too philosophical, but we can create a better world by becoming better communicators. And what I've noticed, with the internet, I remember, in the 90s when they talked about the internet and email and all that, I was like, oh, this is a great opportunity to connect with people around the world easily, just like that. But the truth is that the technology hasn't made us better communicators, but it's accentuated how bad of communicators we are in text, in speaking with people verbally. It's also showed us that different cultures, speak differently. There's hand gestures that I won't do, but there's hand gestures that I might accidentally do that will, hurt somebody's feelings. if you know what I mean. But I think that in order to create a better world, a very simple thing that we can all do is, and it doesn't cost anything, is to focus on becoming better communicators.
When you're speaking, and let's say you don't have anything written or necessarily prepared, but we're having a conversation right now. How do we sort of look at word economy and using the right words and saying shorter, more concise sentences rather than going off on long spiels to explain ourselves?
I think brevity is something that's pretty important. Back in the 90s, you and I were working in radio in Montreal back in the 90s, and I was working with a station called with Mix 96, and Pat Holliday came in as our program director, and he cut our breaks down to 15 seconds. And I was like, well, how can you do that? That's impossible. We got a promo and it's a long sheet like this. How are we going to be able to cut it down? But Pat was able to coach me specifically, and I'm sure it coached the other announcers at the station on how to be able to do that. But of course, that takes written word. Is that the right way to say it? But it takes writing it down. I mean, here's one of the exercises we did, and one of the things that I do when I'm coaching people one-on-one, talk about whatever it is that you're talking about for 60 seconds. Now take that video or that audio that you've recorded and write every single word, every single etc. down. And now look at it again and decide what words, what ums and ahs don't need to be there, and cross them out. And a lot of the times you can cut out half of the words. But the trouble is, even for me, the trouble is being able to do that on the fly, and that takes time, and it takes practice to be able to do that. Becoming a better communicator isn't something that happens overnight, and you never actually achieve the status of Master Communicator. It's something that you can only strive to do, and you practice, you fail, and eventually you get better.
Yeah, so that's a great technique that you just sort of pointed out, where you can do your talking first, and then you can look at the words after. And in this day and age, you no longer need to sit down and write it all out, because you can just have it transcribed. And when you do see your words and you see your voice and how it comes out, then you can massage it. I think a lot of that is about prep. And you and I have spent enough time in radio to know what show prep is. As a performer, I know you don't go into the studio and read the script for the first time when you're behind the microphone in the studio. You're practicing. So speak a little bit about preparation, because it's the one thing that I notice that people really lack and struggle before they get up in front of anybody or before they get behind the microphone.
The prep is important. The prep is important in radio or in any kind of broadcasting, because you're on camera, you're on mic, so you better be ready. To get ready for this interview, I pulled together a bunch of notes, just like that Larry King anecdote. I thought that was pretty cool, so I said, okay, I'll bring that to the conversation with Matt. I probably spent about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, just pulling together various notes. And I have something that I found that I'll share with you a little bit later on. But preparation is very important. One of my one-on-one clients, one of my one-on-one business clients, was having difficulty being put on the spot to give a speech. Not a speech, but a 5-minute pep talk, or even at a wedding, if you have to stand up and give a speech suddenly at the last minute. And I taught him this technique that I started doing, and I'll share it with you. Using my iPhone or whatever apparatus you happen to have, you could take a note. And I created a specific note called storytelling. And at the end of the day, I would take 5 minutes, thinking back on my day and something interesting that had happened. And I write a sentence, maybe 2 sentences of what it was and what it mean, what was the moral of that. And that's it. And I put it away. And every day I try to put in a new one of those anecdotal stories. And so, at the end of the month or whatever, you've got you should have 25 or 30 really good stories that you could just pull out of the air. One of my mentors, Rob Braid, Rob, has that talent to be able to do that, and that's kind of what inspired me to say, how can I do that? And came up with this idea of marking down these little notes. Every time Rob would stand up, he had something really interesting to say, and I thought that was amazing. So that's a way that you can prep for those impromptu talks and come across as being a master communicator.
So when I read your book, I thought to myself, who needs this? And then I thought, well, I need this, for one, because I don't know 100% of anything. So I always find that, okay, I do need, gestures, facial expressions, intonation. So these are all reminders for me. And then I thought, who really could use this? And that's Gen Z. And nothing against Gen Z. I've got 3 of them. And they're, they had to deal with COVID. They've been on TikTok. And they get into the workplace now at the age of 25. And they could be asked a task such as, could you pick up the phone and call this client and have them address this issue? And the look of sheer terror in some of these people to pick up the phone and to make the call. And I've never made a call before. I mean, it's incredible, just, how things have changed and how much need there is for another generation to really, pick up on, this form of communication.
Mm-hmm. When I was putting the idea of the book together, I said, okay, it's going to be a book for young professionals. And I did one of those Google searches, and I said, what is a young professional? And you're going to be shocked, because a young professional is a white-collar worker between the ages of 21 and 49. So technically, you and I are we're old professionals, I guess.
We've aged out.
But up to 49 years old. And so I if you saw in the beginning, the dedication is to my 2 sons, who are both 20-somethings. And I kind of geared it towards them, but I didn't forget about the 35 to 49-year-olds when talking about the book. And it's not really a book. Just like the podcast, which is less than 10 minutes each episode, right? I wanted to keep the book short. I think it was 113 pages, even a place to take notes in the back. But I wanted it to be brief, and I wanted it to come across not as a book or a novel, but I wanted it to be seen as a field guide. In fact, that's what it's called, a field guide for master communicators. And at the end of each one of the chapters, there is, because we're all in a hurry, right? There's the key takeaway of each chapter, which you can literally read in a couple of seconds. And then to help you become that master communicator, I've got 5 tips for each one of the chapters. Can I read the takeaway from the first chapter?
Certainly can.
Yeah, I'm going to read the first. Here it is. So this is takeaway from chapter number 1 from my book called Connect. The chapter is called The Power of Communication. It's the intro. True communication isn't just about transferring information. It's about transformation. Every conversation holds the potential to change perspectives, inspire action, or deepen a relationship. Approach each interaction with this in mind, and you'll find that effective communication isn't just a skill, but a powerful force for positive change. And change is good. And this is something that, my kids got this in their Christmas stocking too, but it's something that Gen Z and anybody really can get some use of. And even if you are an old professional like you and me, it's good to read it and get a tune-up, I guess.
Yeah, so the last words were the ones that I took away there. And that's the writing for positive change. And quite often I write and it's not really for positive change. It's really sort of about formulating an argument, and it's about, trying to beat down, or it's trying to, trying to coerce a change of opinion. And I have to go back and make it positive. And then I probably have to do it a second time. And I don't know why I default to that. It's probably the broadcast era that I grew up in of the 90s where, it was fast, aggressive, and quick. and A versus B and that sort of thing. But in this day and age, to write persuasively, I think working from the positive is something that's my big takeaway from what you just said.
Exactly. I just got back from a trip to Jamaica, and I don't know about you, but when you get out of your your usual routine, etc., and stop rushing and working, you start to get kind of, well, I do anyway, I get kind of philosophical. And I wrote down a few things, and I shot videos actually while I was down there. I'm putting them up now on YouTube and on Facebook. Well, one is particularly I talk about the beach, the shoreline, and how the water and the beach commune with each other. And the question is, when you're communing, you and I, or you and whomever, are you meeting to shape or to erode? It's really philosophical. You can find it on my David Tyler Facebook if you wanted to.
Tell me about over communication. Like
over communication,
communicating too much.
Sorry, am I doing that?
No, not at all. But it is a chapter in your book, and I'm not here to get you to unpack every single chapter because there's so much. But over communication, we've seen companies go down because of it. We've seen speeches bomb because of it. We have podcasts that are too long. So what is over communication? How do we identify it, and how do we get away from it?
Over communication, when people's eyes start to glaze over, when people start becoming distracted, that's a pretty key sign that you are over communicating. How to get away from it, man. I wrote that chapter like last August, so I can't remember what exactly I said.
Well, I would suggest that it comes down to writing, right, and prep.
No, writing and prep, yes. I mean, it depends on the situation, right? If you're having a one-on-one conversation with somebody, if you pull somebody into your office and you're having a conversation, that's different than preparing to be interviewed on the TV or to give a speech to 10,000 people. You don't necessarily prepare to have a one-on-one conversation, but you have to have those thoughts always working in the back of your mind.
Tell me about, and you touched on it earlier, and you just mentioned you went to Jamaica. Tell me about communicating in front of other cultures. I'm not looking for the hacks and the traps, but I just want to be conscious of it.
Well, like I was talking about earlier, there's hand gestures that I didn't even realize that was an insult. Is it in England? What we would perceive as the peace sign doesn't mean the peace sign. I think it's important to. I don't know anything about the Japanese culture, for example. I took a history of Japan course in university, but when you go into a culture like that, you need to find what the traps are. You need to just talk to somebody before you go and listen to them. What is it that could go wrong? You know what I mean?
I love the fact that you've kept the book short and concise, like we should be doing most of our communication, David. I love the fact that you're, by the way, a mentor to many people in voiceover like myself and many others who are going to be coming up and continuing their career. So thank you for doing that. And congratulations on the release of the book.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
One more question, actually, so I forgot to insert. You've got a podcast. Tell me how and why you decided to use podcast to communicate, promote, whether it's promote the book or communicate further about the Master Communicator.
Well, I have another podcast. I had another podcast, and I had to go back and I found one of the episodes. I only did 4 episodes from 2009, and it was called David Tyler Unleashed. I had just involuntarily left radio, and I decided to take the kind of radio that I did was not necessarily what you guys were doing over at Shom. It was about entertainment. It was about bits. It was about not necessarily comedy, but being entertaining. And I said, hey, I could do that. I could do a podcast, this newfangled thing, this podcasting thing. So I started taking all of my bits and putting them into this half-hour show with some interviews and things like that. And it was impossible to keep up, which is why I only did 4 episodes. But then as I was listening to Mitch Joel's podcast, for example, I said, well, I could just do a kind of an interview thing. But I didn't get back to the podcasting until probably, or thinking about it anyways, it was probably the middle of COVID when I said, you know what, let me take my message of communication to the stage and start teaching non-voice actors about communication and the importance of becoming a master communicator. So I prepared a few of those talks and started giving them. But then I said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I went back to this idea of podcasting, but giving just small bite-sized classes, like master classes, to kind of promote the speaking business. But the podcast is taking off, and I said, okay, well, let me do a book too. I think it's, in terms of podcasting itself, I think it's today, not 2009, but today it's a very viable way to connect an idea with an audience.
David, thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show here today. And thank you for your mentorship and everything that you do for the voiceover community and the upcoming voiceover talent that are coming into the business.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for listening to You May Also Like. You may also like our website at youmayalsolike.net. The show is produced by Evan Straminsky and built for your ears by everyone at the Sound Off Media Company.